This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, let's see again Sefer Daniel, Perek Zayin. Last week we learned Pasuk Chav Hey, where Daniel gave the date, where Daniel sees the date of the coming of the Kates, which was Ad Idan, V'idanin, Uplag Idan.
Which we said,
and we said different
year.
Perushim.
We said it's this year, 2013.
We explained Rashi's Pshat, we said the Malbim's Pshat, we combined the Malbim together with Seder Hadairos, and so forth. And last week we were discussing the inyan of how were these Gedolim allowed to give predictions of the Kates if the Gemara tells us in Masechta Sanhedrin, Tipach Atzman Shamachash Kates. Gemara tells us that the bones of those who calculate the end, their bones should rot. So how are these Gedolim allowed to predict when the end was coming?
They're not. And he predicted it, Daniel predicted it 3 times.
Well, Daniel...
It was wrong all 3.
Daniel was merely telling what the Malach was saying, what the Rebbe Shalom was telling him. But the question is, if the Gemara Masechta Sanhedrin tells us Tipach Atzman Shamachash Kates, that the bones of those who predict the end, their bones should rot, then how could the Gedolim come from the times of Rav Sadia Gaon to Rashi, to Ramban, to the Malbim, Rabbeinu Ephraim, the Arizal, and so forth, how are they allowed to give predictions of when the end was coming? So last week we learned from the Igeras Teiman of the Rambam that says the Rambam, really the halach is, it is prohibited to give any date whatsoever as to when Moshiach is coming. And those who give it, they incur the wrath, the curse of the Gemara, Tipach Atzman Shamachash Kates. He says the Rambam, Rav Sadia Gaon. So we explained that the Rambam says, Va'anu danin es Rav Sadia l'kaf schos. You have to judge Rav Sadia favorably. That maybe perhaps what brought him to do this, even though he knew that the Torah prohibited it, is because the people of his generation were very corrupt, and Kemat, the whole Torah was forgotten, and Rav Sadia was able to be mechazek through his speaking, through his pen, and he was able to uphold the religion, and he was mechaven l'shem shamayim to mechazek people. So though technically it's prohibited, nevertheless it was begeder eis lasos Hashem hefiru terasech.
How was prediction of when the earth was going to end? How is that prediction going to bring people closer? How is that?
Well, the point of it was when people hear a concrete date, so then they have something to yearn for. They have something to hope for. But if it's just some kind of endless light at the end of a tunnel that doesn't seem to ever come to an end, then people are miyayish. Okay.
They were enjoying themselves.
The Ramban.
They were enjoying themselves.
Yeah, but they were enjoying themselves at the expense of their yadus. Their religion was.
Sorry, can someone move your car?
Whose car?
Where did you park?
Your car. This car is parking in the street. My wife is where she shouldn't be.
Okay, so the Ramban in the Sefer HaGeula in the Shar Daled, he says something very, very interesting regarding the Isser of being Mechashiv the Kates, and he says like this. The Ramban says that the reason why the Gemara says that one is not to predict when Mashiach is coming is because the Gemara knew that it would be in a very, very long time. The Gemara knew that when would Mashiach come? Very, very long time. And if people are going to start predicting that Mashiach is going to come in 2,000 years, and people are going to say, forget the whole thing. Who could wait 2,000 years? So therefore Chazal decreed that it's prohibited to say when Mashiach is coming. Says the Ramban, Ach mitzad she'anachnu kroivim mehem lekates, but because we're close to the end, and it's possible we're very close because of the amount of time that has already passed. Ulai batla hagzeira. Maybe the gzeira is batal. Maybe the gzeira is batal. Shenigzer alav lahalamasai. Ki batal tam hasiba she'alav. V'hu kiliyamim yamim. So the Ramban says a very interesting thing. The reason why Daniel and the Rebbe Shem wanted the Kates to be Nelam is because it was going to be Liyamim Rabim. It's going to be, well, imagine if in the times of Daniel someone would come and say, you know what? I predict that after the Babylonian exile, and after the Persian exile, and after the Greek exile, and after the Crusades and the pogroms and the Holocaust, I predict Moshiach is going to come. They would have stoned the guy. They would have said, what? We have to wait 2,000 years of Galus for Moshiach to come? So the Gemara said, do not predict when Moshiach is coming. But says the Ramban, but now that we're so close to it, he feels that the Gezerah that the Gemara says is already batal, because if someone's going to make a prediction, 2017, so we'll wait a couple years. That's what the Ramban says. Okay. There's another explanation over here, how it's permitted to predict when Mashiach is coming, and that is you have to look carefully in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yonasan, Tipach atzman shel mechashvei kitzin. The bones of those who predict the end should swell. Shahayu Aimrim, because they used to say, Kivan shehigias haketz v'loi ba, that if the Kates has arrived and Mashiach has not come, Shuveino ba, it's not going to come. So listen to what the people used to say. They used to make predictions, and they would say that if it doesn't come March 1st, 1939, forget it, ain't coming. So to make a prediction and to hang your hat on it and to say if it doesn't come by then, it's not going to come, that's what you know how to do. However, if you're going to say it's going to come by this date, and if it doesn't come by this date, it will come by a different date, that's permitted. That's the pshat of Rav Ruvain Margolis in the Shalas HaTshuvas Min HaShamayim. Okay, so we have three explanations for how it would be permitted to predict the date of Mashiach. Number one, the Rambam in the Igeres Taimon, the Rambam says it was a Hayrah Shah. It was Eis Lasos Hashem Hefiru Tarasecha. The Ramban writes, the Yisur is over. Now that so much of Golus has passed, the Yisur is over. And Rav Ruben Margolis says that the Yisur...
What's the Rambam's pshat?
It was a Hayrah Shah.
Why?
Because the people needed the chizuk. The people needed the encouragement.
Because
and
they were wearing out.
Yeah. And the Rabbi Margolis says that you're allowed to make a prediction so long as you don't say that if it doesn't come by this date, it's not going to come. One last thing Rabbi said we need to deal with is that how is it possible that Reb Sadia Goin was wrong and the Rambam was wrong, the Ramban was wrong, Chas v'Shalom, Rashi, the Malbim, how could they be wrong? I mean, mi pihem anu chayim, we live by their words. How is it possible that these Gedolim made predictions and they were incorrect? So I'm going to read to you what the Vilna Gaon writes in the Even Shleima and Perek Yud Aleph. Says the Gra, B'chol dar vadar shoylet mida acharas. In every generation, a different midah of the Rebbeinu Shalom is more pronounced. Shemazeh mishtanim hativim. B'chol masei hadar v'hanogoseim uparnaseim hakolhu lefi inyan hamida ahi v'tali b'bechirasam ben l'toiv ben l'ra. In other words, like this: every generation, Hashem displays Himself, manifests Himself in a certain way, which accounts for the general behavior of mankind. In other words, why in the 70s people acted a certain way, and in 2013 they act a different way? God's manifestation is slightly different to us, and because of that, people have the ability to choose how they would like to behave in accordance with that. But says the Gra, listen to this: B'chol dar yesh kitzim. Every generation has its own kates. L'fi inyan hatshuva b'hazachuyos hamyuchadim la'isei. In accordance with the repentance and the merit that is specific for that generation. Aval kates ha'achroin, but the final kates, lo'italia b'tshuva, is not dependent on tshuva, but rather it's dependent on chesed. Kama shekasav lemani eseh, and it's also dependent on schos avos. So you hear what the Gra is saying? Every generation has a kates. The beginning of the 18th century had its kates, that if the people do the proper tshuva, Moshiach will come then. And the end of the 18th century has its kates, that if the people do the proper tshuva, the Moshiach will come then. Every every single generation has an appointed time that if the people are worthy, Mashiach could come. And if Mashiach doesn't come by any of those appointed times, there is an end time that Mashiach or bust. So to go back to the question, was Rashi wrong? No, Rashi was right. Rav Saadia Gaon was right. The Arizal was right. The Malbim was correct. It was
capable of coming at that time.
They were saying the Kates of their generation. Okay? So that is a little bit of a background into some of these dates that we're learning in Sefer Daniel. Idan, V'idanen, Uflag, Idan. Okay.
I mean, Jewish philosophy is a big problem that Mashiach will come. Mashiach will come where we're going to be Kula Chayev or Kula Zakai.
Yeah.
So Kula Zakai is a very hard thing that you do.
Kula Chayev is not too hard.
Kula Chayev.
We're almost there.
If it should happen that with Kula Chayev,
there are about 6 of them.
That the Lamadu Tzadikim, the Yosei the Oilam, they would prevent them to come.
Mashiach is in 770.
Rabbi say, all right, enough. So, I just want to add one thing. You know, the Rambam writes in the Ani Mamins, Ani Mamin be'emunah shalema, bevias HaMashiach. B'yafal pi sheyismameya, im kol zeh, achak eloi b'chol yom she'aveh. That's a very interesting question on the Rambam. The Rambam in the Ani Mamins, it's not a toisvis. It's not the im toimar. If you're going to ask a kasha, the yesh loimer, I'll give you a teretz. The Rambam just saying bekitzer nimratz. What the Ani Mamin is. Ani Mamin ve'emunah shalema she'haboyre yisbar shemoi hu levadai asa ve'oisa ve'yasa l'chol masim. Ani Mamin be'emunah shalema she'yiyah tchias hamesim be'isha yala b'rtzoyna. Ani Mamin be'emunah shalema, right? She'yesh sachar tov le'oisim mitzvaysav u'mishalim gemol lo'oiver b'rtzoyna. All of a sudden, Rabbi say, when it comes to the Ani Mamin and Bevias HaMashiach, the Rambam has a kasha. The Rambam is, a big lamdana. And even though I just said there's something called Mashiach, but he's taking a very long time. Does the Rambam have a kasha? Ani Mamin Amur Shalema Sheyesh Sachar Tov U'Mashalim Gemol. Because she is tzaddik v'raloi v'rashav v'tovloi. No, im kozeh ani mamin that there's yesh din v'yesh dayan. Or does the Rambam say, I believe ani mamin that the Rebbeinu Shalom is manig olamai. V'yafal pi shenira sha'olam hefker. No, im kozeh ani mamin. The Rambam doesn't have any kashas. He doesn't have any tirutzim. He's telling you bottom line. Bottom line, there's a God. He created the world. He controls the world. There's going to be Tchias HaMesim. There's Torah and Hashemayim, Nevuah, Moshe Rabbeinu. And all of a sudden, when it comes to the Bias HaMashiach, the Rambam says, now I have a kasha. The kasha is, he hasn't been here in a very long time. The answer is, I still wait for him. Well, what happened to the Rambam? All of a sudden, the Rambam became a Taisvis. So the Brisker Rav says you have to look carefully in the Rambam. When the Rambam talks about the Emunah in the coming of the Mashiach, the Rambam says like this. The Rambam says, Umi she'enoi mamin beviyasoi. Someone who doesn't believe in the coming of Mashiach, or mi she'eno mitzapeh beviyasoi, someone who doesn't yearn for the coming of the Mashiach. Not only, right? He's not only denying the prophets, he's denying the Chumash itself. So the Rambam says 2 distinct principles. Principle number 1 is to believe in Mashiach. Principle number 2 is to yearn for Mashiach. Meaning it's not enough if you ask a Jew, do you believe in Mashiach? Yeah. But are you actively waiting for him to come? Waiting for him to come? Right now I'm waiting for UPS. I'm not waiting for Mashiach. Right now I'm expecting a letter, it'll be here any day. Right now, I'm waiting for my team to win the NBA Finals. I'm not really thinking about Mashiach. So the Rambam's saying like this. Number 1, you have to believe in Mashiach. And number 2, you have to yearn for him. Because if you just believe in it, and you're not actively yearning for it, the Rambam says that you're a kaifer. in the Chumash.
Where does the Rambam say you have to urine?
The Rambam, I believe, is in
Not yawn, yearn.
Hilchos Mamrim.
He says,
He says like this: Mi she'eno mamin b'biyasai, ay mi she'eno mitzapeh. So says the Brisker Rav, the Rambam, when he says ani mamin b'emunah shalema b'viyas haMashiach, v'afal pi she'yisma'al mei is not a question; it's another statement of fact. The Rambam is saying, number one, ani mamin b'emunah shalema b'viyas haMashiach. Number one, I believe in the coming of Mashiach. And number two statement, even though he delays, I still wait for him. It's not a kasha and a taras.
It's another
principle. Part, it's another
You have to mitzvah.
Another ikr. This ikr contains two messages. Message number one, you have to be mamin. Message number two is you have to be mitzapeh. So it's not a kasha. He's just, okay. So let's move on in Sefer Daniel, Perek Zayin Pasuk Chavav. So now we're talking about the downfall of the fourth Malchus. V'dina yitev, judgment will come. V'shaltane yahadon, and its dominion will be removed. Lahashmada, for it to be utterly destroyed, annihilated. L'hayvada, and to be destroyed ad seifa, forever. Forever. In other words, the fourth Malchus will be destroyed forever. Umalchusa, and its kingdom, Vishaltana, and its dominion, Uravusa, and its grandeur, Dimalkivas, Techois Kol Shemaya, of the kingdoms under the whole heavens. Yehivas, it will be given, La'am Kadisha El Yoinin, to the nation of the Supreme High Ones. Who's the nation of the Supreme High Ones?
Moshiach.
That's us.
Oh.
Malchuse Malchus Alam, and then their kingdom, that's our kingdom, will be an everlasting kingdom. V'chol Shaltanaya, and all of their dominion, Le Yiflachan, all the governors will worship it, V'yishtaman, and will listen to it. This Ad Ka, until now, Soifa Dimosa, this is the end of the matter. In other words, Ad Ka means Ad Kan. Until then, it's the end of the matter. This is the conclusion of the Nevuah. Sagi Ano Daniel, I Daniel, Sagi Rayona Yevahalunani. My thoughts troubled me greatly. V'ziva Yishtanoin, and my appearance changed. But Alai, my appearance changed upon me. Umilsa, in the matter Belibi Nitres, I guarded in my heart. But Rashi says Belibi Tzafanti, because we said at the beginning of the Perek that Daniel wrote down the vision, but he did not explain the entire vision. Part of it he kept in his heart. Okay?
Which part?
The part that we don't know about. The part that he didn't disclose to us.
He didn't tell the whole incident of the Malach, what he revealed to him?
Whatever we need to know, he told us.
Only whatever it says.
Yes. Whatever it says.
But there was part of it that the Malach told him that he didn't.
The rest of the story, he preserved in his heart. He preserved in his heart. Okay? So Rabbi say now we come to Perek Ches. You'll be very pleased to discover that in Perek Ches we revert back into the Hebrew language. And the question is not why now we're talking in Lashon HaKodesh. Of course, the Nevi'im is in Lashon HaKodesh. The Rambam says, why is Hebrew called Lashon HaKodesh? Because that's the language God spoke to the Nevi'im. When God gave prophecy, He gave prophecy in the Lashon HaKodesh. That's why it's called Lashon HaKodesh. So there's no kasha why now we're talking Lashon HaKodesh. The shaila is, why before was it in Aramaic? But one thing is also, I believe that Abarbanel explains, that at this point, we no longer speak in Aramaic to signify the downfall of Babel. Meaning we're now switching back to Lashon HaKodesh to demonstrate the downfall of the country of Babel, where they spoke Lashon Aramis. Now, we're going to learn that Nebuchadnezzar was very, very close to Daniel. Whenever Nebuchadnezzar needed something, he called Daniel. But Belshazzar, when he saw the handwriting on the wall, Daniel was used as a last resort. He didn't call Daniel right away. Why? because Daniel did not live in the capital city of Belshazzar. In the times of Nebuchadnezzar, he was in the capital of Babel. But now, in the times of Belshazzar, he's not in the capital of Belshazzar. He's where? Shushan Habira. He's in Shushan. And hence, in the Purim story, you have Hasach right near the palace in Shushan Habira. Okay, Perek Ches. B'shnas Shalosh, in the third year, L'malchus Belshazzar HaMelech, of King Belshazzar, Chazoin Nira Elai Ani Daniel. A vision appeared to me, I Daniel, Acharei Hanira Elai Vatchila, after what appeared to me originally. Now, what is this emphasis? Ani Daniel.
But Belshazzar is after.
Yeah, Belshazzar is after Nebuchadnezzar.
Didn't he stop to cover?
Yes. Nebuchadnezzar, you had Evil Merodach, and then Belshazzar. And then after Belshazzar, you had Daryavesh, and then Koresh. Okay? So, the Malbim says this emphasis of Elai Ani Daniel is explaining that even though many Nevi'im saw the coming of the four empires, nevertheless nobody saw it as clear as Daniel saw it. He saw it with the clearest prism. He was privy to the most understanding of the four exiles. That's why he emphasizes Elai Ani Daniel. Pasuk Beis. Va'era b'chazayin, I saw in my vision. Vayihi, and it was Beroisi, when I was looking. Va'ani b'Shushan Habira, I was in Shushan, the capital. Asher be'elam haMedina, which was in the province of Elam. Va'era b'chazayin, and I saw in my vision. Va'ani hayisi al uval ulai, I was standing by the river Ulai. The word Uval means...
Which capital was Shushan Habira? From where? From which...
Persia.
Persia?
Persia. Now, it only became the capital of Persia during the reign of Achashverosh. So, in the times of Belshazzar, it wasn't the capital city of the empire. But nevertheless, that's where Daniel saw his vision. It doesn't mean Daniel lived there, necessarily. All the pasuk is saying is Daniel saw his vision in the city of Shushan. Now Rashi says, what does it mean, Al Uval Ulai? Uval is like a lashon of Yovel, the river whose name was Ulai. Now Rav Sadia Goin does not like this pshat. You know why? Says Rav Sadia, I am well acquainted with the city of Shushan. And in the city of Shushan, there are no rivers. Rav Zalek, look at your map of Shushan. There are no rivers in Shushan.
No.
Even though Rabbi say, I'm thinking now, there's a pasuk in Megillas Esther that says, Vayavor Mordechai, he crossed. So Rashi in the Megillah says, what does it mean he crossed? It means he violated the Torah. He didn't eat matzah on Pesach. But the Gemara Megillah says, he crossed Orcus Adamaya, he crossed the river. That river was in Shushan. So that would be against what Rav Sadia going to say. Remember such a Gemara?
Maybe it was a wadi.
Maybe it was a wadi. Maybe.
It was what?
It's a dry riverbed.
Morning, nice haircut.
It's a dry riverbed.
How big was Shushan?
I don't know. I believe Rav Reuven Margolis in Hamikra V'Hamasaira, he has a whole article how there was something called Shushan and Shushan Habira. Shushan Habira is where the governors lived, and Shushan Habira was separate from Shushan. I believe he writes it was separated through a river. Vayavor Mordechai. Okay, Rav Zal, that's your homework. the Gemara Megillah, find the river that Mordechai crossed. In any event, the Rav Sadigan learns, what does it mean, Uval Ulai? He says it was the gate of Ulai. The gate of Ulai. The gate of Ulai.
So the Sian says Ova Loshen Yivlai Moim, where it says in Yeshaya.
Right.
Ovlai means a stream.
A stream of water.
Yival Moim.
Good, very good.
So
Now, Uval Ulai.
So
What?
how come he says a...
No, Rav Sadigan's problem with this is that there is no river in Shushan. That's okay. What may be possible is that if there was a Uval Ulai, even if it wasn't in Shushan, Daniel's having a dream. He's having a nevuah. It doesn't have to be exactly an accurate historical setting. He saw it in Shushan. He was by the river of Ulai. The river of Ulai is not in Shushan. In the nevuah, it is in Shushan. It's not such a big kasha. But others say, what's the significance? What's the ominous sign of this river? The ominous sign is to show that the Babylonians are going to be carried away. Va'esa, and the Persians as well. Va'esa einai, va'era, I lifted up my eyes and I saw. V'hinei ayol achad, there was one ram, oinei lifnei ha'uval, standing before the river, v'loi kiranayim, and it had horns. Now, how many horns is horns? Without specifying, it means 2. This represents Persia, because we know Persia was a dual empire. Persia Media, Paras and Madai. Behakranayim gevayos, the horns were high. Beha'achas gevaya min hashenis, one was higher than the second. Behagevaya oila ba'achreina, and the higher one came up second. So first one horn rose, and then the second horn rose higher than the first. Says Rashi, we know Paras and Madai were dual Malchios. However, which one came first? Madai. First Daryavesh came up from Madai, and then the Persian kings rose up. The Gevaya Oila Bachrin Rashi says, Remesu Shetakta Malchus Madai La Malchus Paras. Okay, so these were the 2 elements of the Persian Empire. Ra'isias Ha'ayel says, Daniel, I saw this ram. Minageach, it was goring. Yama. What direction is Yama?
East.
West. The sea, the Mediterranean, is in the west. The west. That represents Persia will conquer the Middle East to the west. Bitzafaina to the north. That represents it will conquer Asia Minor and Europe. How did Persia enter Europe? Through the Dardanelles, right? What's the Dardanelles? So Persia conquered part of Europe to the north. Vanegba, and to the south. Persia conquered Egypt to the south. None of the wild animals were able to stand before it. No one could be spared from it. It did as it pleased, and it grew great. Vani says, Daniel Hayisi Maven. I was trying to comprehend the vision. And a he-goat came from the west. Now, I want to point something out. Persia is being depicted here as a ram. What was Persia depicted as before? A beer. A beer. So, we explained it was compared to a beer. Why like a beer? It ate a lot. It drank a lot. It was hairy. Like the Gemara says, they're interested in taiva. And they like money. They like desire. The times of Achashverosh, he gathered. What was he interested in? Money and women. That's it. All you find is he collected taxes and he made beauty contests. That's the Persian. The Persian, the Gemara says, was corpulent, hairy. They liked to eat and it liked taiva. Now we're explaining it in relation to the other empires and to Klal Yisrael. It's a ram. It wasn't the most violent empire. It's not like the Persians went around killing, destroying, attacking. And who comes after the ram? what was depicted originally as the leopard. Now it's being depicted as the he-goat. And I was understanding the he-goat was coming from the west. On the face of the earth. And it was as if it didn't touch the earth. What does that mean? How could someone travel without touching the earth? You fly. So the expansion of the Greek Empire under whose rule? Alexander. It was as if they weren't touching the ground. They were flying at lightning speed. The Hatzafir and the he-goat, Karen Chazas, had a very apparent horn, Bein Einav, between its eyes. It means like this. Alexander rose to power at a very young age. How old was Alexander when he rose to power?
He was 33 when he died.
He was 32 when he died. He was 20 years old. He was 20 years old when he rose to power. He was a younger man. He was a younger man. And in 12 years, at lightning speed, he conquered the world. And not only that, it was so fast, it was as if he was flying. Rashi says, it was the Marsha says, what's the significance? The Malbim says, what's the significance that the horn was between his eyes? That besides the fact he was a Gibar Gadol, but his horn was between his eyes. The eyes reflect understanding and seichel. Alexander did everything with great chachma and great seichel. Who did Alexander take with him on all of his conquests? Aristotle. In fact, Alexander was very appreciative of one of the Jewish sages. Who was that? This Jewish sage would appear to Alexander in a dream at each of his conquests. Shimon HaTzadik. And in Greek, Shimon HaTzadik is called what? Simonides. Simonides. So Shimon HaTzadik, in fact, when Alexander came to the gates of Yerushalayim, so Shimon HaTzadik came out to greet him, and Alexander said, don't harm this individual, he's the person I see, at all of my conquests.
He bowed down to Shimon HaTzadik.
He bowed down to Shimon HaTzadik.
Yeah. So the generals started to scream at him, you are the king of earth, and bow down to a Jew? That this Jew, I saw, he saved me.
He's the one who appears to me.
Malach.
So interesting that Alexander is depicted as the one who has the horn between his eyes, which reflects that we appreciate his chachma. Look in Vav. Alexander was the king of, yes, Greek, the Greek Empire, yes.
He was actually Macedonian.
Alexander then approached the goat approached the ram that had horns. Asher Yisi Oimei Lefnei Ha'uva, that was standing before the river. And he runs to him in the wrath of his fury. In other words, Persians didn't provoke Alexander. Alexander went right after them. Alexander didn't fight them because there was a battle. He went right after them. Uri Yisif, and I saw him, Magia Yitzal reached the ram. By Yismarmer Elav, they fought bitterly. Vayaches ha'ayel, he hit the ram. Vayishaber shtei karonav, he broke his two horns. V'lohaya kayach ba'ayel lamod lefanav, the ayel had no power to stand before the he-goat. Vayashlichehu artza vayir meseyu, the he-goat threw the ram down to the ground, crumbled him, crushed him, trampled him. V'lohaya matzil ayel miyadeh, no one could save the ram from his hand. Utzafir ha'izim higdil ad ma'od, this he-goat became very great. Uche'atzmai, but in the greatness of its strength. Uche'atzmai means in its prime, in its great strength. In other words, Alexander never dwindled, he never began to decline. He died suddenly, mysteriously, nobody knows. He died suddenly at the age of 32, whether he was poisoned or whatever it was, or he was sick.
He was near the ground in the Sea of Darius.
Okay, they're different, but it happened suddenly. He didn't all of a sudden have a decline. There was no rebellion against him. It was a sudden demise. Uche'atzma, in its power. Nishbra karna gdoila. The mighty horn broke. Vatalena, and it rose. Chazus arba tachteh. It rose in its place what appeared to be 4 horns. La'arba ruches hashemayim, to the 4 ends of the heaven. Because we know after Alexander's demise, his kingdom broke up under 4 generals.
Yeah.
Who were they? Talmai took Egypt. Seleucus took what? Asia Minor. Antigonus took Asia Minor. Seleucus and Philip. Right? The four generals that divided the empire of Alexander, and this is very accurately and depicted in the prophecy of Daniel. Okay, and we'll hold it over here for this week.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.